Hey guys, Fab here with a highly requested video for all Shadow Priests out there. In this video, I'm going to briefly cover Shadow Priest and Mythic Plus. The main goal of this video is to discuss two different talent combinations that I've been using in keys, their pros and cons, and when to use them. If you want to catch me using these builds live in my keys, make sure to come check me out at twitch.tv/fabdaddyx. I've also linked that in the description. I want to leave a disclaimer saying that when I started this YouTube channel, it was just a way to upload content so friends could see and enjoy. So the idea of making a guide is very new to me, but I'm gonna do my best. If you have any feedback so I can make these better in the future and more helpful for you all, please let me know. First, I just want to briefly touch on some important things that apply to both talent builds. Starting with stat priority. For Shadow and all forms of content, your stat priority is Intellect, followed by Haste, then Mastery, which is followed by Crit equal to Versatility. This means that we're primarily looking for gear with Haste and Mastery. It is still important to remember that depending on your item level difference between some items, it may still be more valuable for you to equip something with Crit and Versatility solely because of raw intellect gained. To figure out which pieces of gear you should be wearing in most slots, I'll refer you to raid bots. You could sim using either Dungeon Slice or Patchwork 5 targets for 1 minute. Next section we're going to talk about trinkets. There are a few main trinkets you're looking for as a Shadow Priest. The most universal trinket for Shadow will be Furious Rage Feather from Naku Defensive. This trinket does amazing in all forms of content, single target and AoE, which makes it a big win for Shadow and Mythic Plus. Second trinket you're looking for is Whispering Incarnate Icon from Primal Council and Raid. This trinket becomes way more valuable if a tank and healer also have it equipped. Without them wearing it, you're not getting the bonus stats, so it may not be as worth it. The third trinket is going to be Voidmender's Shadow Gem from Shadowmoon Burial Grounds. This trinket's really valuable as it gives intellect baseline and gives us a large crit bonus on use every 1 minute and 30 seconds. If you're using this trinket, it's suggested to only use it while you're using your cooldowns, so macroing that into Power Infusion is your best bet. The fourth and final trinket, Horn of Valor from Halls of Valor. The trinket is very strong, but less valuable because of the baseline it gives its versatility. The on use is a large intellect buff and lines up perfectly with our 2 minute cooldowns, still making it a strong choice for Shadow. The first build that we're going to discuss today is going to be the no Mind Sear build, which seems to be the one that everybody wants to hear about on my channel. The build itself has gathered a ton of traction recently, and its viability in Mythic Plus is quite controversial in the Shadow Priest community. Without needing to stand still and channel Mind Sear, it offers a unique playstyle that allows you to be very mobile while still getting those large numbers. So I think it's a great choice depending on which key you're doing. The very obvious difference between the two builds is the lack of Mind Sear. Since we don't use Mind Sear, that means our damage is coming primarily through Psychic Link as well as Mindbender. As I mentioned before, the main pro for the build is the mobility that comes with it. Not needing to plant to channel a full Mind Sear with a Mind Devourer proc is really great, and the procs generated from the build also feel awesome. Another pro for the build would be the single target or priority damage that it provides. The build is really proficient at priority damage onto one mob, while funneling it into everything else that's dotted at the same time. And my favorite part of this build is the 1 minute cooldown and playstyle with Idol of Yasarj. So with this playstyle, you will basically have cooldowns going into every single pack. The one major downside that everybody's aware of with this build is when trash packs begin to last too long, the duration of, past the duration of your dots, you're going to need to manually reapply the dots for your Psychic Link damage to be consistent. And this is due to not running Mental Decay, which is the talent that when you're casting Mind Flay or Mind Sear, it will extend the duration of the dots. That being said, it's super easy to lose valuable damage if you're not keeping a close watch on your dot up times. Spell priority can be a real beast as a Shadow Priest, and the no Mind Sear build is no exception. Assuming that all your dots are applied to all targets, with this build you'll always be looking to use Void Torrent and Mind Games first. If these two abilities are both on cooldown, you want to ensure your Mind Blasts are next to be on cooldown. With this build, you tend to be capped on Insanity at times, since the only spell that we really have to dump the Insanity is through Devouring Plague. If you find yourself overcapping on Insanity, I would just suggesting double using Devouring Plague to reduce the excessive overflow. It is important to note that with the Insidious Eye or talent, you'll be gaining 40% Mind Blast damage when your targets have Vampiric Touch, Shadow Word Pain, and Devouring Plague all on them. At this point, if your Mind Games, Void Torrent, and Mind Blast are all on cooldown, and you have a Mind Flay Insanity available, you will want to fully channel this ability. If everything else is on cooldown, and you have no Mind Flay Insanity, you can at that point spend your Mind Spite procs. These procs are to be used otherwise if you're needing to move during a fight to dodge a mechanic. If every single button that you have is on cooldown, and you have no procs to press, you will cast 2 Mind Spikes. This is very specific because it is to cap your Mind Melt stacks to make your next Mind Blast cast 0 seconds. If you have both Mind Melt stacks, and you have nothing else to press, at that point you will then hit Mind Flay. I do want to touch on the rotation and cooldowns a bit as well. The build uses Inescapable Torment, which front loads a lot of power into your Mindbender with the use of Shadow or Death and Mind Blast. A basic opener is going to consist of Mindbender, Shadow or Death, Dark Ascension, Power Infusion plus your on-use trinket, and double Mind Blast. This ensures that you're using your Mind Blast on cooldowns, and that'll get you another Shadow or Death before the Mindbender despawns. Just an extra note, it is important to be using a Mind Blast on cooldown here because it will extend the duration of your Mindbender. Another extra tip I added is if a mob is close to dying when your Mindbender is still out, be sure to save your Shadow or Death to use below 20% if you can, because this will allow you to cast it twice, which will extend your Mindbender even longer and make it strike twice to all mobs. So that is a super daunting spell priority list, which is why most people say it's the more advanced build to min-max. To round this talent build out, the build can and is played in every single dungeon available. Where I generally choose to play this build is going to be Ruby Life Pools, Temple of the Jade Serpent, Azure Vault, and Halls of Valor. This build does perform better in Tyrannical compared to Fortified because of the added single target it brings with its short cooldowns, as well as priority damage, and great single target. Moving on to the Mind Sear Cthulhu build. This build is the bread and butter of Shadow Priest, and is my personal go-to build in nearly every single dungeon after 10.0.5. The damage profile brings is massive without sacrificing much in single target to blast those large AoE pools. The pros with this build, the build is super beginner friendly, and most of the damage can be front loaded into Mind Sear if used correctly. Mind Devour is absolutely amazing and allows us to do competitive damage even without our 2-minute cooldowns if we get lucky with our procs. The cons with the build, it is a 2-minute cooldown spec, and that can make for tough timings when you're planning to use them. And moving on a Mind Devour proc can be super punishing. Just an extra note is there is an issue currently with Mind Sear that consumes Insanity if you move, even if it doesn't do the first tick of damage. The spell priority is very similar with this build to the no Mind Sear build. The main difference is going to be the fillers that you're going to be using. Instead of Mind Spike, you're just solely going to be using Mind Flay when everything else is on cooldown. And this is strictly due to the fact that Idol of Cthulhu is spec'd, and you have a chance to spawn the Void Tendril to deal damage, and generate additional Insanity in the process. The basic burst window does not include Shadow or Death with this spec, because we're not speccing into Inescapable Torment with this build. Instead, you're going to be prioritizing Void Torrent and Mind Games as always, followed by Mind Blast and Mind Sear. During your Void Eruption, you can press Void Bolt every chance you get to. Mind Flay Insanity can then be fully channeled if everything is on cooldown. And if you've got no Mind Flay Insanity, you'll want to prioritize Mind Spite procs, followed by Mind Flay. It's important to note that you should only be pressing Mind Sear above 75 Insanity. This spec can be played in every single dungeon and allows for a less complicated rotation for newer players, and it is the spec I would recommend to all players in any key level if they're looking for a consistently strong spec. So just recapping, I do personally love both specs for Shadow and Mythic Plus, and I will play them both in any key that's available. What it all comes down to in the end is that both builds are equally viable, and you as the player need to choose which style of gameplay you prefer more. Don't be afraid to go in and test things out for yourself and compare the numbers to see what you enjoy playing the most. And just a reminder that I do stream on Twitch, and that is linked in the description, and I'm more than happy to help in any way I can on stream or through the YouTube comments. Thank you all for watching, and I hope it helped you with some questions people may be having so far this expansion.